I had imagined a quiet kind of beauty for my wedding day. Simple linens, clean sunlight, people who knew my name without needing to ask. Instead, I watched a curated show that seemed like it had been directed by someone else. Not someone random. Someone close. Too close. The venue was everything the brochure had promised. Golden vineyards, the distant hum of bees in the lavender bushes, chairs lined in perfect symmetry under a canopy of oak. But the symmetry didn't hold when you looked closer. My name was missing from the welcome sign, a tiny detail, but one that made my stomach tighten. Then I noticed my seat at the front table. It was off to the side, not with the wedding party, not even close to the groom's family. "Veridis, smile," someone called from behind. I turned reflexively, only to see Imogen, the woman who'd married my father after my mother passed, posing with a group of relatives, her laugh just loud enough to command the photographer's attention. She was radiant in that uncomfortable way, overprepared, overly centered. It was clear who'd arranged the morning, the angle, the narrative. I took a slow breath, reminded myself this was still my day. Or so I thought. Approaching the reception area, I saw the place cards laid out across a linen-covered table, neatly printed names, elegant calligraphy, but when I found mine, I froze. Veradis Maribel. I blinked. That wasn't my last name. Not legally, not in any form that mattered to me. I leaned down, picked up the card, turned it over, hoping it was a misprint or a mix-up, maybe a vendor's mistake. But then I heard a woman near the champagne cart say, "I love how they used Imogen's family name. It makes it all feel so unified." So this wasn't a mistake. Imogen caught my eye from across the room. She lifted her glass in a mock toast and smiled, warm on the outside, calculated beneath. I didn't smile back. Inside, I was already rewriting my vows, even though the ceremony hadn't started. "Are you excited to finally join the Maribel legacy?" a guest asked, handing me a flute of Prosecco. I turned slightly, nodding, choosing my words carefully. "Actually, I'm not changing my name." "Oh," she laughed, brushing off my correction like lint. "Details. What matters is that you're part of something bigger now." I let her comment float away. It wasn't worth the argument. It rarely was. Microaggressions dripped like condensation down a glass, soft enough to miss if you weren't looking, sharp enough to cut if you held them too tightly. I'd grown used to it. Women who didn't comply with narratives got rewritten. That's how Imogen worked. She didn't erase you by force. She made you optional. The pre-ceremony chatter began to fade as the officiant took the microphone. "Before we begin," he announced, "we have a very special reading from the father of the bride." The blood drained from my face. My father had passed away 3 years ago. He hadn't left a speech. I would have known. We'd talked about it, briefly, painfully, but he'd wanted to write me a letter. Something small, just for me. Then Imogen's voice filled the air. "Thank you all for being here today," she read. "On behalf of my late husband. He would have been so proud to see the incredible woman Veridis has become, and he would want me to thank everyone who shaped her into the person she is today." She went on, listing names I barely recognized, never once mentioning my mother, never once using my full name. People applauded. Some dabbed their eyes. I stood still, fists curled under the silk of my dress. "She took my name," I whispered internally. "She took my bloodline. She even rewrote my father's voice." I stepped away before the clapping ended. Back inside the dressing area, I sat in front of the mirror. The makeup artist had done a beautiful job. Soft blush, neutral tones, lashes curled just so. But none of it looked like me. It looked like a bride in someone else's story. The music started outside. Piano, soft and inviting. A song I'd chosen weeks ago. At least that part was still mine. I touched the place card again. Veradis Maribel. A name I never claimed. And then I looked at my reflection. The day was supposed to start with love. Instead, it started with erasure, and I hadn't even walked down the aisle yet. The courtyard was filling fast, all linen-covered tables and slow-moving clusters of guests sipping rosé. A string quartet played somewhere to my left, behind a row of hydrangeas. I stepped onto the garden walkway, the heels of my shoes barely making contact with the flagstone. but my entrance didn't pull a single gaze. No one turned, no heads tilted. The attention was already directed elsewhere, toward someone who had planned for this moment with the precision of a campaign strategist. It didn't take long to see why. There, near the arch of white roses meant for our ceremony photos, stood Imogen. Her hair was in loose, sweeping curls, classic but deliberately soft. Her dress, a floor-length gown in blinding ivory satin, clung like it had been tailored for red carpet lighting. I heard a man chuckle softly behind me. Is she renewing her vows too? And a woman's voice responded, maybe she just didn't want to be upstaged. No one laughed, but no one corrected them either. My eyes darted to the front row, where a large framed photo had been set up the night before, a tribute to my mother. We'd selected the picture together, me and the photographer. It was the one where she stood barefoot on the porch of our old home, sun catching her collarbone, wedding ring glinting just enough. That was supposed to be there. That was the seat of honor. Instead, Imogen's portrait filled the space. Not a candid, not nostalgic. No, this one was posed, studio lit, with her wrapped around my father's arm, pearls draped over her neck like the centerpiece of an estate auction. I crossed the grass quickly, murmuring, "Excuse me," until I reached the nearest event staff. "Hi, I'm sorry, can you tell me what happened to the portrait that was supposed to be here?" I asked, gesturing to the frame. He blinked, adjusted his earpiece. "Ma'am, we were told the original photograph didn't arrive in time. Mrs. Maribel provided this one this morning." "She did?" I asked, my voice barely above wind. He nodded, polite but unconcerned. "She said it would match the aesthetic better. Something about cohesion." I turned away before I said something impolite. As I walked back, my mother's voice floated through my mind. Not soft, not loving, just practical. People who erase the dead often fear being forgotten themselves. The phrase didn't come with tears, it came with clarity. My hands shook slightly as I adjusted the neckline of my gown. My bridesmaids noticed, offering small nods of encouragement from afar. None dared approach. They didn't know how to navigate this kind of war. Who would? Near the cocktail tables, a family friend waved me over. "Sweetheart," she cooed. "I just wanted to say how stunning everything looks. Imogen's touch is all over this. It's like she planned a royal wedding." I bit the inside of my cheek. "She certainly has a vision." "She looks amazing too," the woman added, oblivious. "At first, I thought she was the bride. That white dress. Brave choice." "Very," I replied, letting the silence after hang like a brick. Another guest leaned in. "Are you related to the woman in the white gown? She seems like the host." "She's my stepmother." "Ah," the guest smiled, clearly believing that explained everything. It did not. Just then, the officiant passed by, rehearsing his notes with an assistant. I caught him say, "Okay, so, we gather here under the Maribel family." Before the assistant stopped him to clarify. I didn't correct him. Not this time. I walked a slow circle around the fountain, hoping for calm. What I got was a parade of well-meaning faces all asking the same thing. Where's Imogen? Did Imogen pick the colors? Was Imogen a designer in her past life? I was the bride, but apparently she was the story. The ceremony was minutes away. I leaned toward the floral arch, letting the lavender brush my wrist. I heard the click of a camera and turned just in time to see Imogen stepping onto the aisle for a solo photo. She stood exactly where I was supposed to walk in moments. Guests lifted their phones, some snapping without shame. Her head was tilted, lips barely parted in a smile that said, "I've arrived." I watched from behind a garden pillar. No one saw me. No one needed to. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't awkward timing or miscommunication. It was deliberate. She wanted this moment, not just the party, not just the family. She wanted the bride's entrance without the bride. And she got it. My fiancé was in the main house, still getting ready, unaware. He didn't see the glances or the murmurs. He didn't see the woman in white standing in my place. One of my bridesmaids approached me quietly, offering a bottle of water. "You okay?" she whispered. "She planned this," I said, more to myself than to her. "Are you going to say something?" I shook my head. No, I'll wait. Wait for what? For her to overstep. She looked confused. She already did. No, I corrected. She thinks this is her moment. Let her take it. I want them all to see it for what it is. You can't outshine someone who planned the lighting. But sometimes, the camera catches too much. She squeezed my arm gently and walked back to the group. Inside, I started counting what was mine. The vows in my own handwriting, the shoes I picked, the friend who offered water without asking for credit. It wasn't much, but it was something. If she gets the camera, the crowd, and the credit, what do I have left but my name? I stepped away from the garden path and slipped behind the venue into the rehearsal room, an oak-paneled space that still smelled faintly of lemon polish and anticipation. My fingers brushed the back of a mahogany chair, but I didn't sit. I just needed air. Quiet. A few minutes without curated playlists or camera clicks. Inside, the light felt heavier. Dim, but not dark. Warm, but not kind. I'd grown up believing there were places women went to gather themselves, bathrooms, closets, stairwells. But this room had been my mother's favorite during our first visit to the vineyard. She called it the nerve center, a place to pause before stepping into what the world expected of you. Funny, the world had expectations. I just wanted my mother back. Jenna, one of my bridesmaids, poked her head in without knocking. You okay? I nodded, which wasn't quite a lie, but not truth either. She entered slowly. You've been so composed. Have I? I asked. She hesitated. Maybe she doesn't mean harm, Ver. I didn't answer right away. Then, that's what people say when they want you to make peace with being dismantled politely. Jenna looked away. I pressed my palm to the cool window pane. She didn't need to wear white. She didn't need to give speeches. She didn't need to change the playlist. Jenna's eyebrows lifted. Playlist? I'll get to that. She gave me space, walking toward the closet to hang her shawl. I started breathing in counts of 4. In, hold, out, hold. For a moment, I pictured my mother standing in this very room, hands on hips, laughing at how I'd chosen a ceremony that required so much management. Just say the vows, she would have said. Everything else is costume. I missed her voice most in moments like this. Not the warmth, but the clarity. A soft knock. Mrs. Delaney peeked in, holding a small square box wrapped in silver foil. I just came to drop this off. Didn't want to interrupt. You're not interrupting, I said. Thank you. She stepped closer. It's not much, just something old, from your mom actually. Found it in a box when I was clearing my attic last month. Thought you should have it. I smiled, genuinely. She loved your attic. Mrs. Delaney chuckled, then looked down. It still feels wrong she's not here. She is, I said softly. She placed the box on the table. You know, Imogen did so much after your mother passed, took care of the insurance mess. Really stepped up. I paused. What did you say? She smiled, thinking it was a compliment. Oh, the policy stuff. Life insurance is a beast, isn't it? She handled most of it after the accident. At least that's what your father said. But Imogen wasn't his wife then. Her smile faded. Oh, well, I assumed she was helping early on. Maybe I got the dates wrong. She stepped back toward the door. Anyway, enjoy the gift, sweetheart. I stared at the box after she left, a slow burn crawling up my chest. I hadn't even known there was a policy until 6 months after the funeral. Dad said it was small, barely covered costs, but he bought this vineyard the year after, with a deposit I never asked questions about. Grief makes you grateful for anything, and manipulators count on that. I opened the gift, an old brooch, tarnished but elegant. My mother's initials were carved into the back. A relic. A remnant. Not long after, the ceremony coordinator came in, clipboard in hand. Veradis, can we do the final walkthrough? Just a quick one? I nodded. She handed me a printed schedule. Here's the updated playlist. Let me know if you need adjustments. I scanned the paper. What happened to simple gifts? What? The song I picked. It was supposed to play when I walked down the aisle. Oh, she frowned, flipping her notes. This says we're using A New Dawn. It's what Mrs. Maribel sent over. She said you'd signed off. I folded the sheet calmly. I didn't. I'm so sorry. Would you like me to change it? I exhaled. No, leave it. Are you sure? I'm sure. She gave me a hesitant nod and left. Imogen had chosen a song titled A New Dawn. Of course she had. It was her narrative, her version of rebirth. Me? I was just the occasion. I returned to the prep room, locked the door, and slid to the floor. I didn't cry with abandon, just one clean line down each cheek. Then I opened my vow book and rewrote the ending. No more soft metaphors, no more polite deference. If I was going to say something today, it would be with spine, not syrup. You don't owe grace to those who trade your silence for stage time. My pen moved with certainty. I wrote not just what I meant, but what I wouldn't regret. My phone buzzed. It was from Eulalia. A photo. Imogen standing under the wedding arch in her white gown, bouquet in hand, eyes tilted toward a camera. The caption read, "She says it's just for her memoir." I stared at the image, then set my phone down gently. If she wanted a memoir, I murmured, I'd give her the plot twist she never saw coming. The scent of citrus and champagne clung to the air as servers moved through the crowd with trays of hors d'oeuvres. Laughter rose like mist from the clusters of guests under the canopy of twinkling bulbs. I stood near the edge of the lounge area, glass in hand, pretending to listen to a cousin recount her flight delay while my eyes darted, tracking Imogen's path across the courtyard. She wore that expression she reserved for interviews and television, polished, poised, perfect. It wasn't a smile. It was a brand. Then came the mic. "I know this isn't on the program," she said sweetly, tapping the microphone once. "But I wanted to say a few words. Weddings are about love, of course, but also about family, especially blended ones. And I have been so lucky to be part of this beautiful journey with Viratus." People turned to listen. Glasses clinked, laughter softened. My body stiffened. "We're all just so proud," Imogen continued, "of how far Viratus has come, especially since that first marriage didn't quite work out." The breath caught in my throat. A few guests chuckled, some glanced around as if they weren't sure they heard correctly. A few politely nodded, trying to help smooth the moment. I didn't move. Inside, something broke loose. That wasn't a toast. It was a scalpel. Imogen handed the mic back to the DJ like she'd just shared a treasured secret and walked back into the crowd, accepting compliments like applause. I stared down into my glass. The bubbles were gone. Most of Quentin's family didn't know about my first marriage. It wasn't a secret. I just didn't think it was necessary to preface every life event with a disclaimer. And it certainly wasn't Imogen's place to announce it like gossip dressed up as pride. An older aunt from Quentin's side leaned over and muttered, "Well, second time's the charm, right?" I didn't respond. I just nodded like a statue might, barely moving, blank by design. Across the lawn, I caught Eulalia's eyes. She mouthed, "I'm sorry." I nodded again. Quentin approached from the side, oblivious. "You okay?" "Just nerves," I lied. "You sure? You look kind of tight." "I'm fine. It's hot, that's all." He gave me a small smile and kissed my cheek. She means well. And there it was, the oldest defense in the book. She means well. What they always say when the damage is subtle enough to be denied, but sharp enough to leave a scar. I excused myself, stepping toward the buffet line, only to overhear two young cousins whispering near the cocktail napkins. "She dropped out of college, right?" one asked. "That's why she's awkward with people." The other giggled, eyes wide. I turned slowly and met their gaze head on. "Would you like to repeat that louder?" They froze. One dropped her cracker and bolted. The other stammered, "We didn't mean, I heard what you meant." I walked on. Halfway to the drinks table, a man I vaguely recognized, someone from the groom's extended side, waved me down. "Hey, sweetheart, can you check on the champagne buckets? They're looking low." I blinked. "Excuse me? You work with catering, don't you?" Before I could answer, he looked back at the table. "It's fine, I'll find someone." He walked off without waiting. No one stepped in to correct him. Imogen saw it from across the space. She tilted her head and smiled, That tight, tidy smile she wore like a weapon. I walked, not to anyone in particular. I walked until the chatter dulled into a hum and the sting in my throat settled into silence. Reaching the edge of the vineyard, I kicked off my heels and stepped onto the gravel path, sharp and uneven beneath my bare feet. I welcomed the ache. All my life, I had been called sensitive, difficult, dramatic. The kind of woman who took things too personally. So I stopped speaking. I stopped defending. Because each protest was used as proof. Now I cataloged. I documented. I filed the moment under microaggressions wrapped in hors d'oeuvres. They call you dramatic until they need your silence to stay comfortable. Tonight, I wouldn't shout. I wouldn't storm out. I would wait. I would watch. I would make sure every misstep left a mark. My phone buzzed. An unknown number. Just a photo. A snapshot of the rehearsal dinner place cards. Each one carefully designed, calligraphed in silver ink. Mine read, Veronica Maribel. The caption beneath, Tomorrow, you'll be the footnote. I stared at the screen. Then I smiled. Let them keep pushing. Let them build their version of the story. Tomorrow, I'd write the ending. The bridal suite was quiet when I stepped in. Too quiet. I stood for a moment, hand on the doorknob, before letting it shut behind me with a soft click. The silence didn't soothe. It expanded, pressing against my ears like pressure underwater. There, one of the assistants called. They're ready for final fittings. I nodded and moved toward the mirror, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to see what she'd done this time. The dress hung on the wardrobe like a monument. Ivory silk, fitted bodice, sleeves exactly how I'd asked. But the second I stepped into it, something was wrong. The fabric didn't hug, it hung. The waist was too wide, the chest too loose. I didn't need a measuring tape to know this wasn't how I'd ordered it. Can you zip the back? I asked the seamstress quietly. She struggled, then cleared her throat. Actually, we adjusted it yesterday. Your stepmother asked. She said you'd had a stressful week and might be more comfortable with extra space. I turned to look at her. She said that? The woman nodded, avoiding my gaze. Did she also pick this shade of lipstick? I asked. The seamstress stayed silent. Across the room, my bridesmaids pretended to fix their own makeup. No one knew what to say. One finally whispered, You look great, really. I look like I'm dressed for her apology, I replied. And that was the truth. This wasn't about the dress fitting me. It was about me fitting into the story Imogen wanted to tell, one where I was insecure, soft, manageable. But I wasn't going to give her that. I let them finish pinning and prepping, then walked into the main hall for the final run-through. The planner handed me a scroll. Here are the vows. Let's do one dry pass. I opened it and stopped. The words weren't mine. Marriage is the joining of two worlds under one guiding hand. I read aloud, then looked up. That's not what I wrote. The planner blinked. Excuse me? I wrote my own vows. I gave them to the coordinator last week. She looked at the paper. This came in yesterday, from Mrs. Maribel. She said it was updated, approved by you. Of course she did. I folded the vows back up calmly and handed them back. We won't be using these. The planner hesitated. Do you want me to find the originals? No, I have them. I walked away before she could ask more. Back in the suite, I dug through my clutch. Beneath tissues, mints, and a backup lipstick, I found the folded pages I'd written weeks ago. The ink was slightly smudged from being handled too many times, but the words were intact. I read the first line and exhaled. It was mine. I pinned them inside the hem of my dress, right where the fabric touched my ribs, close enough to feel with every breath. One of my bridesmaids watched. Is that your vows? I nodded. You're not going to read from the mic? I'll decide when I get there. She looked worried. She's setting you up. Again. I know, I said. But this time, I'm not reacting. I'm documenting. We stood in silence for a moment before I added, They think I'll be too gracious to push back. That's always been their mistake. She nodded slowly. Do you want me to stay by your side during the vows? No, I need them to see me alone. As the music began outside, the suite emptied. I was the last to leave, but the first note stopped me cold. It wasn't simple gifts. It wasn't soft strings or subtle piano. It was orchestral, overproduced. The kind of music they use in political documentaries. Imogen's voice echoed in my head from a past interview. "A new era," she had said once. "You mark it with a tone." I didn't move. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at the bouquet in my hands. Too heavy. Too manicured. Nothing wild left in it. I stepped back into the suite and placed the flowers on the vanity. They could keep the song. They could keep the aisle. But the words, they'd have to burn me to take those. I needed space. Not a symbolic kind of space, but actual oxygen away from carefully arranged peonies and choreographed chaos. So I ducked out of the bridal suite and headed toward the smaller lounge tucked behind the estate manager's office. It wasn't on the guest map. That's what I needed. Somewhere she wouldn't think to look. Inside, the room was cooler, quieter. The air smelled like aged wood and someone's citrus cologne. I collapsed into the leather chair near the window and exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. My phone buzzed. I ignored it at first, then gave in, thumbing through photos. Me and my mom at her old studio, a blurred selfie from the kitchen on my birthday, a snapshot of her handwriting. I kept scrolling, hoping for grounding. That's when I tapped a red notification without thinking. It opened Facebook. A status update popped up, set to Friends Only, but someone had tagged Imogen's name, and the algorithm had let it slip through. The post read, "She thinks she's the bride. I've been the one building the legacy all along. Let her wear the dress. I own the aisle." It was posted the night before. I stared at the screen, read it once, then again, then a third time. I didn't move. Just watched my reflection dim across the glass of my phone. I screenshotted it, sent it to my email, saved it twice. I knew better than to assume a manipulator wouldn't delete a trail when caught. I wasn't hurt, not in the way people expect. I was gutted in a slower, more precise way, the kind that hits when you realize you were never part of the picture, just part of someone else's proof. My phone buzzed again. A knock on the door. One of the estate staff. He held out a manila envelope labeled vendor receipts. "Your stepmother said to give this directly to you," he said. I took it without a word. He nodded, awkward, and left. I opened the envelope. There, tucked between catering invoices and final floor plans, was a copy of the deed to the vineyard. I almost laughed. A piece of paper this ordinary shouldn't have felt so brutal. But it did. Because the name at the bottom, the new legal owner, wasn't mine. It wasn't even my father's. It was Imogen Maribel. I flipped back through the documents, my pulse quickening. The purchase had gone through less than 6 months after my mother's funeral. The original down payment had come from the insurance claim, something Dad had told me was minimal, just enough for funeral expenses and some leftover college bills. But the math didn't lie, and neither did the notary stamp. I dialed the vineyard office, hand shaking. A woman answered. "This is Melody." "Hi, this is Veritas Talitha. I'm calling about a title revision on the property. I'm seeing a name change. Imogen Maribel?" "Yes," she said, voice smooth. "That revision was processed a few months ago." "Was there an ownership transfer agreement?" "There was. Your stepmother signed the documents in person. Everything is on file." I hung up before I said something reckless. Everything in my chest felt tight. This wasn't just about the wedding. This land was my father's last decision. Bought in grief, maybe. Bought too quickly. But it was ours. Or so I thought. Turns out, I was just renting the ceremony. I stood in front of the full-length mirror. My reflection didn't look broken. It looked exposed. I stared at the seams of the dress, the way the fabric fell differently after the alterations, at how the neckline had been softened, the waist let out. I whispered aloud, "No more giving the benefit of the doubt to people who bankrupt me emotionally." Then I pulled out a pen from my purse and wrote my mother's name, in cursive, inside the sleeve cuff. Small, just enough that I'd feel it against my wrist. A staff member knocked again, telling me the ceremony was lining up. I nodded calmly and reached for my phone. I texted my attorney, "Sent you screenshots of an FB post plus property docs. confirming fraud based on original intent plus timeline. Thoughts? The reply came instantly. We can pursue this. Fraud under inheritance code. It's actionable. You're not alone. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, put my phone down, adjusted my earrings, smoothed the hem of the dress that wasn't quite mine anymore, and walked back toward the aisle. If she wanted a ceremony, I'd give her one, just not the kind she could control. The air was thick with artificial cheer. I made my way through the crowd, careful not to scuff the hem of the dress that had already betrayed me once. I was summoned, no, invited, to the lounge area by one of Quentin's aunts, who thought it would be good for everyone to see the bride mingle before the big walk. I obliged, because I had learned to show up, not because they deserved it, but because I wanted the evidence. Veradis, so glad to finally meet you. A tall man in a beige linen suit greeted me with both hands clasping mine. Quentin's been telling us how grounded you are, not flashy at all, exactly what the family needs. I smiled. That's kind of him. Another woman stepped forward, clutching a glass of Chardonnay. He said you know how to balance strong personalities. It's rare these days to find someone so agreeable. I bit down gently on the inside of my cheek. Thank you, I replied, nodding once. More guests joined in. Compliments, all curated to sound flattering, but something felt rehearsed, as if someone had passed around a script titled How to Compliment Veradis Without Making Her Too Big. It was subtle, polite, deadly. They knew my image, not me. I scanned the space. Where was Quentin? A few minutes later, I wandered toward the side hedge near the courtyard. That's when I heard them, his voice and hers. You've got this, Imogen said, her tone low but sharp. Just don't forget to say how grateful you are. People respect a woman who knows she's been given a chance. I'll remember, Quentin replied. Touch on the journey. Make it sound like she's grown through adversity. Don't make it about her achievements. Make it about how you stood by her. Right. And don't let her get too emotional up there. Stay calm. Reassure the guests she's grounded. We don't want drama. I didn't move, didn't breathe. This wasn't about helping. It was about control. Not just over me, but over how I was to be interpreted, managed, delivered. They hadn't just groomed him for marriage. They'd groomed him to manage me. I backed away slowly, returned to the garden bar where the clink of ice and small talk still ran like background noise. A woman I recognized as one of Imogen's friends beamed at me. Darling, congratulations! And oh, how exciting! Imogen told us the vineyard's hers now. Perfect timing, right? It'll be such a prestigious addition to the family legacy. I stared at her, then smiled. Prestige built on inheritance theft? I said sweetly. How quaint. Her face paled. The small circle around her froze. She laughed awkwardly, eyes darting left and right. I didn't wait for a reply. I turned and walked. I didn't walk fast. I walked like someone who had decided her time wasn't theirs to waste anymore. Inside the hallway, I paused. How many times had I been told to be the calm one? The peacemaker. The rational voice in the room? I used to think being composed meant being wise. That silence was strategic, that not reacting was a kind of elegance. But silence in this family was a tool, a lid, a lock, a leash. Silence is not a lack of opinion, I whispered to myself. It's often the burial site of too many. I stepped into the dressing suite and opened my phone, typed a short message to my lawyer. Confirm vineyard ownership filing from probate case number 0467. Need documentation. Timeline matters. Sent. Then I bent down and pulled out a second pair of shoes. Flats, clean, neutral, comfortable. If I'm going to war, I muttered, I won't do it in heels. I stood, straightened the dress, checked my reflection. They thought I was the one being walked down an aisle. They had no idea I was walking into the fire, and they'd already lit it. They groomed him to handle me. Now I'll show them what happens when I handle the truth. The chairs were being set, row by row, each with a small satin ribbon and a lavender stem tucked neatly under the name cards. Guests mingled near the wine barrels, sipping, whispering. I stayed just behind the curtain of ivy that lined the archway entrance, hidden but not hiding. The heat in my chest hadn't cooled since I'd changed into flats and sent the legal message to my attorney. And now, as the ceremony loomed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was watching someone else's show. Near the front, Imogen stood surrounded by staff. She directed the photographer's angles, approved the floral positioning, and even corrected a planner's clipboard. "She's the mother of the bride, right?" someone asked nearby. "No," another guest answered. "She's the one running everything, practically the host." I clenched the vow card in my hand tighter. Sometimes silence doesn't preserve peace, it poisons it, and today the poison was bubbling just beneath the champagne. I stepped forward slightly, just in time to hear a little voice behind me. "Are you one of the assistants?" I turned. A small girl, probably 7, stared up at me, fidgeting with the bow on her dress. Before I could answer, Eulalia appeared at her side. "She's not an assistant," she said firmly. "She's the bride, the one who lost everything to make this day beautiful." I blinked at her. Eulalia, so quiet all week, now stood like stone. Imogen's voice snapped from across the path. "Let's not start dramatics on such a hopeful day." A relative nearby chuckled, leaning toward the little girl. "Imogen has always been the heart of the family. She's just irreplaceable." I didn't move, didn't flinch. I watched Eulalia shift her gaze to me. No more words, just silent apology and steady defiance. They rewrote the cast, but I still knew the script. Eulalia tugged my sleeve. "I need to show you something." We stepped to the side, behind a vine-covered trellis. "I recorded something," she whispered. "I wasn't trying to snoop. I just couldn't sleep, and I needed proof in case things got worse." She handed me her phone. I hit play. Imogen's voice came through instantly, clear, calculated. She was never meant to be more than a transition. If I let her think she belongs, she'll take everything. And I didn't spend 10 years managing this family to hand it to someone who didn't earn their place. I didn't blink. I didn't even breathe. 47 seconds. That's all it was. But it was everything. Then, before I could even return the phone, a crackle rang out from the main speakers by the ceremony arch. The audio had synced, Eulalia's phone, through the test mic channel, and it played, every word, louder than Imogen's curated playlist. The courtyard fell into silence, one gasp, then another, then murmurs, rising like static from every corner. Imogen turned, stunned, frozen mid-pose as camera flashes caught her mid-expression, eyes wide, lips parted in horror. I stepped out from behind the trellis. The officiant scrambled forward. "Ladies and gentlemen, we, apologize for the technical—" "Don't," I said calmly. I walked straight down the aisle meant for me, not to meet a groom, not for photos, but to meet truth. Imogen didn't speak. She couldn't. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. I stood in the center, turned to face her. "Legacy isn't taken," I said. "It's lived." I didn't elaborate, didn't justify, didn't beg the crowd for understanding, because I didn't need to. Eulalia walked to her seat, cheeks flushed but proud. And when she passed Imogen, she didn't look at her. The guests didn't clap. They didn't cheer, but they watched, and they listened. The officiant tried to resume his notes, but his hands were shaking. A stranger approached me after a few moments of stunned stillness. A woman in a navy dress, from Quentin's side. She leaned in, voice low. "Thank you for saying it out loud, even if it wasn't your voice that did." I nodded. As I turned to walk back inside, I caught sight of Imogen grabbing her phone, her face tight, steps fast. She barked something into the speaker, maybe a lawyer, maybe PR. She built her power on people being too polite to speak. That foundation just cracked, and I hadn't even spoken yet. The applause had stopped. The murmurs turned into silence. After the audio had played and the truth became a scream nobody could deny, I walked away. No one stopped me. I passed rows of guests with their mouths slightly open, eyes darting to each other, unsure if clapping was still appropriate. Somewhere behind me, someone called my name. But it didn't matter. I wasn't running. I wasn't crying. I was done performing. I slipped back into the side room where my dress still hung like a ghost. I stepped out of the altered gown slowly, unclipping one side, then the other. I folded it once and laid it gently across the chaise like a flag on a casket. Let it rest. On the table sat a box I hadn't touched. I hadn't cared to. The tag read, "For my daughter-in-law." Imogen's handwriting. I opened it. Inside was a wooden puzzle, half-finished, with several centerpieces intentionally missing. The note taped to the underside read, "Every woman must find where she fits. Or be the extra piece no one needs." I stared at it, longer than I should have, then whispered, "That's the last script you'll ever write for me." I placed the box back in my purse, not for keepsake, evidence. At the back of the closet hung my mother's suit. Ivory. No shimmer, no train, just clean, sharp dignity. I changed, slipped into her shoes, ran a hand through my hair. As I stepped out of the room, I could hear the coordinator calling my name, panicked. I ignored her, let them wonder. I walked to the aisle alone, no bridesmaids, no bouquet, no veil. Gasps traveled like ripples through the chairs as guests turned. Someone whispered, "Is that her?" A child's voice near the front piped up, "She looks like the mayor." I smiled at that. I climbed the platform, didn't wait for introduction, didn't wait for permission. I asked for the mic. The officiant hesitated, then handed it to me. I took a breath, looked straight into Imogen's eyes and said, "This ceremony was never about vows. It was about permission. And I revoke mine." The words echoed more than I expected. I scanned the faces. I'm not here to impress a family I wasn't allowed to belong to. I'm not here to validate theft disguised as tradition. And I am certainly not here to read lines written for me. A few people shifted in their seats. I want to thank those of you who showed up for me, the real me, the version who didn't shrink or smile for approval or vanish quietly. Some of you didn't even know who I was until 5 minutes ago. That's okay. You do now. A beat. Then I added, as Maya Angelou once said, "I come as one, but I stand as 10,000. I am not the guest in this story. I am the narrator." Silence. Sharp. Whole. I handed the mic back, turned, and walked toward Imogen. She was seated, stiff, face unreadable. I pulled the puzzle box from my purse and handed it to her. Leaning in, I said quietly, "You gave me pieces to confuse me. I found the picture instead." I stood back. Camera flashes flicked like lightning. She didn't respond, didn't move. A murmur moved through the crowd. Then one woman clapped, then another. I didn't need a standing ovation. I needed the echo. They expected a bride. What they got was a reckoning. The clinking had stopped. Not a single champagne glass had been raised since I handed Imogen that puzzle box. People stood around like extras in a scene that had gone off script. I could hear chairs being adjusted, someone coughing too loud, a murmur of, "What now?" sweeping through the courtyard like wind across dry leaves. A woman brushed past me, whispering, "Powerful, dear. Just, wow." Another man muttered to his wife, "That wasn't in the program." I didn't respond. I wasn't performing. They expected a toast. Instead, they got a tectonic shift. Imogen stood frozen near the main bar, trying to summon that controlled smile she'd trained into muscle memory. It faltered at the corners. From behind me, someone tapped my shoulder. My cousin, Naomi. "There," she said, lowering her voice. "You should see this." She turned her phone screen toward me. The live stream of the ceremony, which had been shared on the Vineyard's official page, was playing. Except, I wasn't in it. The camera had focused solely on Imogen, the arch, the guests clapping, the aisle. Not a single frame had captured me speaking. The comments scrolled below. "Who's the actual bride? Is this a fashion show? Why is that woman giving a speech like she owns the place?" Naomi scrolled up to the video description. "Look," she whispered. "It even says Maribel family wedding, not your name." I felt it land. Not like a blow, but a confirmation, the final square in the jigsaw that made sense of everything. She hadn't just tried to own the day. She'd tried to erase me in real time. I turned to one of the AV techs by the soundboard. "Who gave you your camera instructions?" He hesitated. "Ma'am? Who told you to frame it that way?" Mrs. Maribel's assistant said you requested privacy. No close-ups, no aisle shots. Did I sign anything?" "No, it was verbal." "Of course it was. They didn't just take the stage," I muttered. "They rewired the spotlight." The mic was still on. A few guests heard it. Good. Behind me, I heard a server gasp. I turned just as a woman in a navy blazer approached Imogen quietly, slipping something into her hand. Imogen's eyes narrowed. "What is this?" The woman leaned in, calm as a judge. "You've been served." Imogen blinked, confused, then opened the envelope. Her face turned to stone. She froze. For the first time all day, she didn't know which direction to face for a camera. The room, or rather, the lawn, went dead quiet. Whispers turned to gasps as news spread, legal summons, for fraudulent estate transfer. Imogen tried to gather herself, clutching the papers too tightly. She looked at me. I looked back. Neutral. No rage, no tears, just knowing. I didn't need to fight her. I just needed to finish the paperwork. She spun to her assistant. "Get the car, now!" They disappeared into the crowd. Quentin started toward me from the edge of the terrace. I turned before he could speak. No confrontation. No theatrics. Let him chase a ghost of a woman he never bothered to learn. The music never restarted. The speeches were canceled. The tray of champagne flutes remained untouched. I walked to the edge of the lawn, found the quietest spot under the pergola near the rose hedge, and sat alone. No veil, no audience, just breath. My phone buzzed again. Messages? Dozens, one from a reporter I didn't know. "Would love your comment on what just happened. Major story unfolding." I typed one sentence. "Not today. Let them write what they saw, not what they were told." I hit send and tossed the phone on the table. A few feet away, a bridesmaid found me. "What happens next?" she asked. I took off my earrings slowly, smiled. "This wasn't the end of something," I said. "It was the beginning of not pretending." I stood up, took one last look at the venue that had tried to swallow me, and walked toward the gate, not looking back. Let the record show. She did not leave in shame. She left because the room was no longer worth staying in. The door clicked behind me like the closing line of a play I never agreed to star in. Inside the bridal suite, the silence was thick, almost rehearsed, like even the furniture knew not to speak. I didn't turn the lights on. I wanted the dim, the quiet. Just me and the mirror. I reached for a tissue, not for tears. Those had dried up chapters ago, but to start wiping off the makeup I hadn't asked for. The contouring, the shimmer, the illusion of calm. My hand trembled slightly. I kept wiping. The mirror didn't reflect a bride. It showed a woman unlearning how to please a room. My phone buzzed on the vanity, again and again. I turned it over, face down. I wasn't abandoning the day. I was surviving it. A soft knock. I didn't answer. Then another, lighter. I opened the door an inch. A little girl stood there, brown curls, flower crowns slightly crooked. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I just wanted to say." She fidgeted. "My mommy said you were brave." "I heard the lady call you names." I knelt, leveled with her. "You heard that?" I asked gently. She nodded. "But mommy said grown-ups who lie are scared, and that you're not the scary one." I didn't know what to say, so I just hugged her. She squeezed tightly and whispered, "Don't be sad. You're still the bride, even if you don't wear the dress." And just like that, I felt it. Not vindication, not closure, recognition. Children don't miss lies. They remember silence. I stood, thanked her, and sent her back toward her parents. Then I sat again. My reflection looked softer, not sadder, real. The phone buzzed. Again. Quentin. I let it ring twice, then picked up. "There," he started, voice rehearsed. "That was a lot. I think people are confused. Maybe we could meet? Talk it through? Talk what through? I asked. You know, the tension, the awkwardness. I didn't expect. I cut in. You didn't defend me. Not once. That's not a husband. That's an audience member. Silence, then. You're being emotional. Click. The line went dead because I killed it. I stood, walked out of the suite and down the side path into the vineyard garden. The sun had lowered just enough to cast gold over everything. Petals from my unused bouquet lay scattered on the grass. Not trampled, unclaimed. I looked up at the sky. No prayers. Just decisions. Back in the room, I grabbed my journal, the one I hadn't touched in over a year. I carried it to the bench and sat beneath the pergola, wind moving soft through the vines. I opened to a blank page and wrote the first sentence without hesitation. The room I left was never mine to begin with, but what I build next will be. My phone buzzed again. This time it was from Ava, one of my bridesmaids. Proud of you. Let's get wine tomorrow. I smiled, slipped the journal back into my purse. No tears, no breakdown, just decisions. I may have walked out of a wedding, but I walked back into myself. No flowers, no champagne. But this felt more like a ceremony than anything wrapped in tulle or hidden behind rented arches. I stepped out of the black car in a charcoal gray suit. Not flashy, not bridal, just mine. My heels clicked against the steps of the Napa County Superior Courthouse, a rhythm steadier than any wedding march I'd ever imagined. My lawyer met me at the top of the stairs. He didn't say good morning, just handed me the file, opened the door and said, "Today, we get to close a file she never thought we'd open." I nodded. And we're going to open a few she never knew I kept. Inside the courtroom, it was quiet. Not out of reverence, but anticipation. It smelled like polish and old paper. The judge's bench sat centered like an altar. The mic in front of me had no veil, no vows. I never got an aisle, but I got a bench, a mic, and a truth they couldn't unhear. When they called my name, I stood tall. I took the stand, looked at the judge, and began. I spoke of my mother's estate, the insurance payout that somehow disappeared, the deed to the vineyard my mother saved for in silence, the manipulated paperwork, Imogen's forged narratives, the transitions that weren't transitions, just thefts with lipstick. The evidence spoke louder than I ever could. Screenshots of conversations, audio from Eulalia, transaction timestamps, witness testimonies. It all built like a crescendo, not emotional, just undeniable. The judge leaned forward. What made you wait until now to pursue legal action? I met her eyes. Because for years I believed staying silent was noble. I no longer confuse silence with peace. There was a murmur. Quentin sat 2 rows behind me, silent. For once, no one asked him to speak. The ruling came quickly, almost anticlimactic. The transfer of the vineyard property was reversed. Imogen was ordered to pay restitution. Restrictions were placed on her future financial movements. No prison, but her name would never again be whispered in trust over an estate table. She didn't storm out. She just faded. Funny. All this time she wanted the spotlight. Now even the shadow wouldn't claim her. Outside the courthouse, the air tasted different. Eulalia hugged me tightly, her eyes damp but smiling. My former bridesmaid Ava handed me my phone. "You're trending," she said with a smirk. I glanced at the screen. Headlines everywhere. Not because I was dramatic, but because I stopped letting other people curate my dignity. I turned to my lawyer. "I'd like to move forward with the annulment." He raised an eyebrow. "Any particular reason now?" I handed him the wedding ring, placed inside a folded napkin. "Include that in the donation box," I said. This wasn't about heartbreak. This was about clarity. Some people say love is the foundation, but boundaries? That's what keeps it standing. As we spoke, cameras clicked. Not at me, but toward the car waiting across the street. Imogen's silhouette ducked into the back seat. Her face, for once, behind glass, hidden. I didn't chase her with words. I didn't need to. By nightfall, I was back in my apartment. Quiet. Clean. At the kitchen counter, I poured myself a cup of black coffee. My mug read, "Build your own damn castle." I smiled and opened my laptop. The manuscript was already complete. The final chapter had been waiting on this moment. Chapter title, "The Wedding That Freed Me." I printed the last page, folded it, slipped it into an envelope addressed to a publisher that once rejected me for being too emotional for nonfiction. This time, I wasn't emotional. I was accurate and liberated. I sealed the envelope. I wasn't born to perform gratitude for people who treated my survival as a favor. This time, I walked into the room, and no one dared confuse who the story was about.